I'm Jen Babakhan, and you're listening to the Caretaker's Journey podcast.
I'm your host, Carole Leathem, and today's meaningful conversation is about having peace when walking through a hard journey. My guest today is Jen Babakhan, and she is the author of 2 books, Detoured, the messy grace-filled journey from working professional to stay-at-home mom, and this one that we're going to talk about today, Disrupted, finding peace with a parent's terminal illness. Jen lives in Northern California with her husband and 2 young sons. She is a storyteller who loves to use her gift, always pointing people to Jesus and God's enduring love. She is hilarious, and if you follow her on social media, which you should, you will find yourself smiling and laughing at her posts. I was on there this morning, and the one you posted this morning, Jen, was hysterical. Swatting bugs when there were floaters in your eyes. I mean, it was crazy, and I can relate. Jen and we both share the love of all things coffee and beach. And Jen, I'm happy to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah. And what you listeners don't know, and I'm being very transparent here, is that Jen and I have tried to do this 3 times. This is the 3rd time. And every time the technology has just driven me crazy. And one time it was her, one time it was me. So we are praying for technology to work today. And, Jen, our conversation today is hitting very close to home because when we first interviewed a few months ago, when I first started the podcast, I wasn't walking through this journey. And now I'm walking through a terminal illness with my mom. So I am looking forward today to diving into this conversation and finding hope and inspiration from the journey that you walked. So I'm so excited you're here. So Jen, talk to us a little bit about the backstory of Disrupted and your parents or your mom, as I know it is, your mom's terminal illness. How did that all unravel in your life?
So, this is the book that no one ever wants to write or, have a reason to write. But the way that it came to be was essentially that my mom went to the hospital with extremely high blood pressure and was just looking for some medication to help bring it down. And by the time she left, she had a stage 4 cancer diagnosis that was terminal, and she was given 6 to 8 weeks to live.
Wow.
So as you can imagine, it was incredibly shocking and really turned my entire world upside down. At the time, my 2 boys were almost 3 and 5. And loved their grandma so very much. My family is very close knit. We all live within 2 miles of one another, and so the fact that this diagnosis was given to us so out of the blue and such a surprise, I think, really just shattered us in so many ways. And it really felt like the ground just fell from underneath our feet, and we all had to find a way forward. And so the journey was difficult, and God was present. Jesus was present every step of the way. And after she passed, I just couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to write a book, not for those whose parents had already passed, because there's a lot of books for that, for grieving a parent, grieving a death of some kind. But I could not find anything, at least not in the Christian market, for those that are currently walking the road of having a parent with a terminal illness, and all that entails, because that in itself is just as much of a journey as the after death journey. So that's what I did. I didn't want it to be only filled with my experience, although it is very memoir and that I do detail our experience as a family. But I also included the stories of 7 other women who had also walked this path with a parent, mothers and fathers. And then I also interviewed some lovely mental health professionals that were so kind to be interviewed and to offer some really incredible tools for those that are going through this. Because if you've been on this journey, and if you're a caretaker, you know that there's not a whole lot of time to go and seek therapy for yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, so you're just gathering it along the way as you go. And so I really wanted this book to be a resource for people as they're walking through it.
That's that, and I have looked, and you are correct. There is not a lot of information out there. It's the same
Mhm,
reason why I wrote my book, Jen,
mhm,
because when my husband started to struggle with his issues, I couldn't find anything because very rarely do people want to write about what it's like to walk through it. They do. They come and they wrap it up. They kind of come at the end and wrap it all up. And what I'm discovering is the need is for walking through it. And one of
right.
the things that really I resonated with me is at one point you asked yourself the same question that I asked myself, which is, am I strong enough for this?
Mhm,
I would say to myself, how am I going to do this? I'm not this strong, and how am I going to get through this? And so I'm really curious to know what your answer was and where you found that strength, because that is a typical question: is how am I going to get through this? How am I going to do it? I had a woman reach out to me this morning through a text message. She found me on the social media and she just reached out and she said, I'm drowning here.
mhm.
How am I going to get through this? So when you asked yourself the question, am I strong enough for this? How did you find the answer?
So, yeah, I mean, when I thought about that, and it was such a deep, heavy feeling of, am I strong enough for this? Can I meet this moment?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the answer really came to me slowly over the journey, and the answer was that I was not strong enough for that, and I don't know that anyone can be strong enough for that. Um, but Jesus is strong enough for that. God is
Yes.
strong enough for that. And it was as though I was just being held in those
Mm,
moments when there was no explicable way to explain why I was able to walk through those hospital halls,
mm-hmm.
carry myself from one moment to the next, hearing the worst news that you can imagine,
Yeah.
and trying to absorb that all at the same time. There's no explanation except that God was strong and God was
Mm-hmm.
carrying me, that Christ was present in so many ways that, uh, that felt so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, um, it becomes a saying, well, God is with you, Jesus is there, he understands. But in those moments, I truly felt his presence and his
Yes.
strength and his hand holding on to me, through the entire thing. So I don't think as humans we are meant to handle these things and endure these things on our own. This is not the way it was meant to be. We know that in
Yes.
our at our very
Yes.
core, we know that in our souls that this place is broken. The experiences that we have of pain and brokenness, were not his plan.
Right.
And so I think when we think about Jesus drawing near to the brokenhearted, it
Yes. My
is
favorite
true.
scripture.
It is
Yes.
true. He does. He binds our wounds. He draws near. He rushes in during those
Mm-hmm.
times when we cannot hold ourselves up. He's holding us up. And that
Absolutely.
really was, what I found along the way, was that I couldn't sit and think about, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? It was, well, God can do this. And
Yes.
and so it was kind of a combination of, I'm not going to have anxiety about what's in the future now.
Right.
I am going to stay in this present moment because God's
Mm-hmm.
here with me in this present moment and he's already in the future. I don't have to be in the future.
Yeah.
And really staying there and understanding, like, I don't have to, my brain does not have to go 2 months from now. My
Right.
brain can stay right here, and I'm going to trust that Jesus is already there.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I found the morning after I had to leave my husband in a psychiatric hospital, when I was asking God, how am I going to do this? What the heck? That was my
Mhm,
favorite phrase. What the heck? And I really felt the inspiration of God when I read that scripture you just quoted about God being
mhm,
close to the brokenhearted, because God feels our tears. He feels our pain. He feels our grief, and he knows that what we're going through. And so many times when we're in that moment, if we're not living in that moment and we let the fear and the anxiety and all of that stuff overcome us, we miss those moments where he shows up. And so
Right.
I just made a vow to God. And I said, God, I am going to live right now in this moment, because
Mhm.
this moment is all I'm guaranteed. And
Mhm.
I love to say, this is the only moment that we're guaranteed, because
Right.
the next moment, we don't know what's going to happen. And if we live in the next moment, then we're missing this moment. And I just don't want to miss
Absolutely.
any moments. I don't want to
Mhm.
miss any moments. So, what steps did you take to care for your mom as she battled this illness? What things did you put in place to care for her, since you're so tight knit? Because I'm in the same situation with my mom. We're
Mhm.
very close. My sister and I are very close. And so we've had to put all kinds of things in place. So, what kinds of things did you have to put in place for your mom as she battled this illness?
Sure. So, originally we were given that 6 to 8 week timeline. We were told possibly she would have a few more months with treatment. And so they immediately gave us the numbers for palliative and hospice care,
Mm-hmm.
which we contacted. We had them come out to the house. But I also knew that I, for the sake of all of us, and my mom was, of course, on board, she wanted a second opinion as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in the middle of California, so we have equal distance access to Stanford and UCSF.
That's
And
great.
so I got on the phone with Stanford and said, "This is the situation. My mother's been given this terminal diagnosis." I was very clear with the women on the other end that I knew that probably there's a lot of people clamoring for an appointment there, but every week that went by for my mom was
Mm-hmm.
crucial. And so I
Yeah.
just truly, and I didn't hold back being emotional during those calls. Not I don't mean that to say negative or rude or demanding in any way, but if I got teary or if I was
Mm-hmm.
emotional in the moment because I was basically begging, please find a
Mm-hmm.
way to get my mom in. I didn't hold back from that because I think the humanity of it is so important. And I
Absolutely.
think sometimes on the healthcare side of it, they lose sight of the fact that these are individual families. These patients are cherished in their
Mm-hmm.
families, all of that. So long story short, we got her into Stanford. It was there we had a wonderful care team. They held hope for us and said, "We're going to throw everything we can at this thing, and then when we can't do anything else, we're sending her to UCSF for clinical trials." And so between the two different hospitals, she lived almost another 3 years.
Wow.
So, we were given that 6 weeks, and God gave us another almost 3 years.
Mm.
And so it was also during that time that, so we had brought hospice or palliative care into the home originally after that first hospital diagnosis. And I remember the nurse telling me, she said, "Your mom doesn't need this right now. She's she's doing fine." I know that there was that initial panic that, she said, but she went in for high blood pressure. Like, she didn't go in because she was not able to bathe herself or care for herself. So and they said, "We'll come back when you need us." And so I think that was also one of the things that I didn't understand at the time, because when you hear palliative care or when you hear hospice, you
Mhm.
instantly think this person has weeks to live. They are on their way out,
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah.
And what I learned during this time was that it's both. You can have palliative care come in just for general times of checking. You can also have them come in and out as needed. It's not like
Yeah.
once you sign up, they have to be there for the entire time. Um, and so I think kind of my view of how that whole process works changed as well. And
Yeah.
so we really did use it to our benefit,
Mhm.
towards the end when we knew treatment was no longer working, she knew she was going on to hospice care, then we brought them in, and then it felt like the appropriate time to have that in place. Um, but mentally for my mom, I think it was much better for her to be on her own caring for herself as long as possible, especially after we had a little bit of hope from the
Yeah.
Stanford doctor saying, "Hey, we can try to buy her a couple years. Like, I think we could." And that was just such a gift from God after going through that initial pain and shock of knowing we had like a month left with her, you
Yeah.
know?
So so what I'm hearing you say is you didn't just give in to the diagnosis, that you decided to fight and get a second
Mhm.
opinion. And in getting the second opinion, you actually bought your mom some more time. You bought you guys some more time as a family. We
Right.
just started my mom on palliative care, and it's something I was not aware of. I thought that I've known for a while that my mom had a terminal diagnosis, but like
Mhm.
but like your mom, she didn't. There were things that you could see, but there were more things that you couldn't see. And so
Mhm.
we got her into an assisted living, and she was just thriving and doing great. And then all of a sudden she wasn't. And
Mm.
so that's when her nursing team suggested palliative care, which I was
Mhm.
not aware of. And palliative care is like one step above hospice. They will
Right.
still give you treatments. They will still,
Mhm.
be proactive for your health. It's not like just comfort care with hospice.
Mhm.
And we've discovered this whole new world of care for her, where they'll help her take a shower because she can no longer do it herself, where they
Mhm.
only come in once a month now to check, but there's a 24-hour phone line that I can call, my sister can call, the nursing team at her apartment complex can call if we have
Mhm.
if we have an issue. And so yeah, it's so incredible to learn about that, something I never knew. And when they determine that she's probably within I think they said 6 to 8 weeks, they will
Right.
guess, um,
Mhm.
then we'll move her into hospice. And we don't know what that's going to look like. But like we said a
Mhm.
few minutes ago, we're living in that moment. So that's kind of cool. So let's talk for a moment about grief.
Okay.
Because in April, I did a whole show when I came back from my trip in April about grief. Because when I got there in April, my mom had lost 30 pounds. I could tell
Mm.
she was failing. The grief hit me hard. And I was like, wait, she's still here. And I didn't really
Mhm.
understand what the grief was. But then I took a step back and I remembered what my therapist had told me when I started walking through this journey with my husband,
Mhm.
that we're grieving the loss of what was and what will never be.
Mhm.
And I was grieving watching my mom suffer, and the
Mhm.
loss of who she had been and how strong and independent she was, and now how she's not. So let's talk for a minute about your grief. How did you deal with, number one, the shocking grief of, oh, my mom's got a terminal diagnosis, and then the
Mhm.
grief of just watching her slowly as this disease was taking over her life?
Right. So, originally, grief will have its way with you, I think, regardless. And when we first got that diagnosis, I was kind of surprised because I don't think of myself as an overly emotional person. I mean, I will tear up from time to time, but I'm typically not like a public crier or someone that, but it took all of that away. I was crying in elevators. I was crying walking into the hospital. I was crying walking out of the hospital. It was like this deep pain had nowhere to
Yeah.
go but through my face. Like
Yeah. Oh,
there was
I
not going to
got
be
you,
an
girl.
option.
I got
Um,
you.
and it was exhausting. I
Yeah.
remember the sheer fatigue of just coming home from the hospital at night and I would just pass out. It was like I did
Mhm.
not move. I didn't change positions in my sleep at night. I would wake up in the same position I went to
Yeah.
sleep in, because it's just this heavy, heavy, exhaustive grief. As the journey kind of went on, um, that anticipatory grief set in more of
Yes.
knowing what was to come. For me, it was a mixture of not only this deep, overwhelming grief, but also this anxiety of this feels looming,
Yeah.
and I don't know how to deal with this, knowing this is coming down the road. And again, it's that moment of Jesus saying, "Be here with me now. Be here with
Yes.
me now." Our human
Yes.
minds want to go forward because we think it's going to protect us.
Right.
You think like if I can just figure it out now, then by the time it comes, it'll be like, okay, that wasn't so bad. Um, and that's just not how it works at
No, it's
all.
not.
And so I found little moments along the way, like you're saying, when you saw that your mom had lost that weight. For me, it was, when she got the chemo port, And
Yeah.
I could see the chemo port, and it was this very obvious reminder that things were different. We were never going
Mhm.
back. This was a new normal. So it was like this visible reminder that this was a new reality for us that we were walking
Mhm.
through. Um, and, it just progressed from there. And each time that I would see her kind of take another step down
Yeah.
in her ability or her health, that would just be a time where I would and maybe this isn't right, but I would hold it together for my kids because I
Yeah.
didn't
Oh,
I didn't want to just fall apart all over the place. They had already seen me do that when she was diagnosed. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try to keep it together. But I usually save my tears before bed, in the bathroom, when I was showering, I would cry in
yeah.
the shower
Yeah.
because it has to go somewhere. And I
Yeah.
always felt better after. I always felt like, okay,
Yeah.
now I can handle this. This is a new phase that we're in. It doesn't change how awful this is, but I feel like I've processed
Yeah.
it just a little bit more. Um,
Yeah.
but at the very end when, you know, I could see that death was coming.
Yeah.
That is that's a hard thing. And there's no way through that but through it. And
Right.
to hold tight to Jesus and to say, this is her physical body.
Mhm.
This is a shell. This is
Mhm.
not truly her that's wasting away.
Right.
And soon she's going to be birthed into the new version of her.
Yeah. And
Um, yeah.
we can say that, and what
Mm,
I love what you just said. You said we just have to walk through it. And
mhm,
if we don't walk through it, then it changes the way we grieve. And
mhm,
so when I came back in April, I just decided I was going to lean into it,
mhm.
not go to the end, but to lean into it. And as I
Right.
leaned into it, just taking it one step at a time. I want to kind of unpack just for a second. You talked about your kids, holding it
Mm,
together for your kids. How
right.
did you help your kids get through the grief and loss? And how did you how because I know we've got listeners out there that have
Mhm,
kids who are walking
mhm,
through maybe with this with a grandparent. My kids
mhm,
are older, but I know that they're still walking through it. My great grandchildren, her great
mhm.
grandchildren, my grandchildren, her great grandchildren are also going to be walking through this. So
Right.
how did you walk through this with your kids? What did you do to help your kids deal with the grief and the loss?
So at the beginning, um, I was honest with them, but I was also gentle with,
Mhm.
because if you've got someone that is not going to survive an illness, and you've got two or more children or one child, however many you have, that is expecting that their loved one is going to be there always, and because kids
Mhm.
obviously don't expect that they're going to be losing anyone. Um, and so I explained, grandma has an illness, and she's not going to get better. Like, she's sick and
Mhm.
she's not going to get better. We are, and of course I remember my 3-year-old asked, "Well, can't they give her medicine? Like, the doctor will give her medicine?" And I said, "Yeah, we're going to do medicine, and it's going to hopefully make her feel better for a while. And then
Mhm.
eventually she probably won't feel very good anymore. And then she'll go be with Jesus. But for
Mhm.
right now, we're going to focus on the fact that we're going to give her medicine and she's going to feel better for a while."
Mhm.
Um, and then as it kind of progressed, my kids could see that she was progressing, but also, there's that delightful oblivion of childhood where they aren't
Yes.
quite aware. Um, and there came a point too where she had kind of gone downhill to the point that my husband and I had a conversation, that it was not going to benefit my kids seeing her in that
Yeah.
condition, that it was going to be too much for them.
Yeah.
Um, and I think every parent kind of has to decide where that line is for their
Mhm.
kids. And I wanted them uh, to remember her, have as many good
Mhm.
memories of her as they could. And so it was at that point that I just said, mommy's going to go and visit grandma on her own now. Like, this is time for
Mm.
just mommy and grandma to spend.
Mhm.
And so, especially during those last weeks, that's what I did. And as we were holding vigil and all of those things, after she passed, um, it I think it was a slow realization for them outside of the funeral, of course. But there was this slow realization as our family kind of found our new normal together that, well, grandma's not going to be at birthday parties.
Right.
Grandma's not going to be at holidays. And my mom, um, is such a big soul. I say is because she is still alive.
Yeah.
She is such
Yeah.
a big soul. And she always was during parties and everything. It was her voice that you heard laughing. It was
Aw.
her cracking the jokes. Her spirit made everything beautiful and fun and
Aw.
joyous. And so and so when that wasn't there at family gatherings and such, it was afterwards that, especially my younger son would say to me, without grandma here, it's really different. It's really
Oh.
different without grandma here. And so I would validate that. Yes, it
Yeah.
is very different without grandma here. But it doesn't mean that it can't still be good.
Right.
So it's just going to be different and we're going to
Yeah.
find our way through the different. And then, just making room for their emotions because there were a lot of
Mhm.
times that, they would be having a day that was just really emotional for them. And I knew um that I didn't want to be the one that got emotional with them. Like I wanted to be that safe space and also that like
Mhm.
comforting, like steadying presence of like, yes, this is awful because I almost like as a parent, watching your children grieve your parent
Yes.
is a
Yes.
whole other level. So you've
Mhm.
got these different layers of grief. You've got your own what can feel like crippling grief, and then on
Yes.
top of that grief, you've got the grief of your children that you're
Right.
carrying as well. And then if you're like me, my father, thank God, is still with us, and there's the concern for him,
Mhm.
how he's dealing with it all. So I think, especially as women that are in this role of kind of making sure everybody is okay,
Yes.
it it um it's hard. It's tricky. It feels like juggling. Um,
I can get
but
I totally get that.
Jesus is the underlying strong netting that's holding you through it all.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
can't do it. I don't know how people without faith can navigate something like this because for me, it was in those deepest moments of anguish that I felt him come right next to me. I could
Yes.
feel him right there. And
Yeah.
if you haven't gone through that kind of an anguish, you may not understand it, but his presence was so clear to
Mhm.
me in that time. And that's something I carry with me today is that faith that even in
Mhm.
those moments of deep pain that he comes alongside and he will
Absolutely.
not leave you alone. He will not
No.
leave you alone.
No, he doesn't. So I always like to close out the show and talk about like
Mhm.
self-care because I
Mhm.
believe that when we're going through our caretaking journey, that if we
Mhm.
don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of anybody else. So I have things that I have been doing for years because I've been caring for my husband, but then now even with my mom, there are things that I have forced myself to do. So
Mhm.
as we close out, talk to us just a little bit about how you cared for yourself during this journey. And then in the next 24 hours, I always ask my guests in the next 24 hours, what is one thing that you are going to do to take care of you? So, talk to us about how you cared for yourself during the journey
Mhm.
and then what you're going to do in the next 24 hours.
Yeah, so during the time, when I was in the thick of all of this, exercise became more important to me than ever
Hmm.
before.
Absolutely.
I have always dealt with anxiety in my life, and the one way I know to deal with it is to work it out physically through some form of movement. It is
Yes.
so helpful for me. So I
Hmm.
remember during that time, in fact, uh, when I got the call from my dad that the hospice nurses had said it could be any day now, I was on the elliptical and just pouring sweat. And so I got off the elliptical and changed my clothes and ran over to their house, but that was key to me during that
Yes.
time, was getting that anxiety that was just that energy in my body and just getting it out, like
Mm-hmm.
moving it out of there. So I think that's hugely important. What I'm going to do today. So normally I've continued working out every day. Working out, yoga are two of my really, really vital things. I
Yeah,
meditate. I'm very much into calming that nervous system as much as you possibly can. It's so
absolutely.
important. It's so vital for us. But today, I'm taking a break from that today. I have a couple of things going on this afternoon. So my plan today is to sit down with a good book and maybe a
Oh,
cup of tea
I
and
like that.
relax a little bit this afternoon. So that's what I'm doing in the next 24 hours. I will get back on the
That's
treadmill tomorrow. Today it's book and tea.
That's great. That's great. Well, I had someone reach out to me this morning, out of the blue, and I shared that earlier when we were talking. And the first thing I asked her was, so what are you doing? She's caring for her mom, and she's the main caretaker for her mom. And I said, so
Mm,
what are you doing? And I said, can I give you a suggestion? And she said, I discovered that the gym is a really important place for me to be. And I started
mhm,
laughing because that's what happened to me. I found a place and a trainer to work out, and
mhm.
I go 5 mornings a week, and it's
Yeah.
like that is the thing that just keeps me almost grounded, so to
Yes.
speak. So,
Mhm,
oh, I love that. But then I am also a coffee girl in the morning, but and then I'm a tea and a book girl as well. So that's fun. Well,
mhm.
Jen, thank you so much for this meaningful, authentic, and transparent conversation. And you've helped me tremendously now
Oh,
as I'm walking through this journey with my mom. And I did order your book. So those
oh,
of you
thank you.
listening, I will put the link to order Jen's book in the show notes, as well as her website and then her social media, because you do need to go follow her on social media because she is hysterical.
Oh, thank
But
you.
thank you for writing a book about how to navigate the journey, not how it ends, but how to navigate it, because I think that's so important. And if you, as a listener, would like to know more about my personal caretaking journey, the links to my book, Are You Ready to Find Joy When Life Gets Messy, as well as
Mhm.
my website and my social media links, are also in the show notes. And I also would ask that you hit subscribe or follow, because I have had the incredible opportunity. A few weeks ago, Jen, I had a scientist, this beautiful woman, scientist on, and I asked her and challenged her to research our tears. And what she
Mhm.
came up with in that episode it blew me away. It just blew me
Oh,
away. And so
incredible.
that's how you find out when a show drops. That's how you get information. And that's also when you subscribe or follow, that kind of puts you higher up in the rankings so people can find you when they search. And I hope you'll also share this show with a caretaker especially if they're walking through a journey with a terminally ill parent. And I'll be back next week for another meaningful conversation about the caretaker's journey. And until then, it's all about him.